Hello, everyone, and hello, Dr. Van Dam. This is my ancient Greek mosaic research project for 2023. I decided to choose Greek mosaics because I thought they were so fascinating and beautiful. I mean, it's kind of odd when you think of mosaics. You think of these Roman and Italian mosaics, which are also beautiful, but I kind of thought, like, well, where did all those come from? They didn't just magically appear, right? So, what are the origins of that? So that's why I chose mosaics, and I wanted to learn about, well, where did they originate from? And it turns out they're from Greece, right? So this is perfect for my research project, and so I'm going to be moving forward with that. So let's get started. So first, this is just a quick little reminder. Um, I wrote a report just explaining the research I did and kind of giving a more in-depth dialogue on how these techniques came to be and how they were used. So there's some examples, some things like that that'll, like, there's a lot of vocabulary within this slideshow that is defined within the report that is, I'm sure you know, but for me, I need you to know that I know um, what this vocabulary means, like tesserae and all these things, right? So please just read the report first, and I think that'll be very useful. So first we got Nereid riding a sea centaur, which is super cool mosaic here. I mean, you see it was mostly preserved aside from a few pieces that have come off, unfortunately. But in this mosaic, they're using some nice tesserae that they obviously crafted. I'm assuming some slaves took a long time to create these tesserae, in these small pieces, hitting them against the rocks, splitting them so they're nice and even. It's not an easy task, as I found. Splitting rocks and getting them to split how you want is not easy. It's very challenging. So this piece, although compared to modern day art, is not very exciting, but for the time, this is really beautiful, really took a lot of work, and there's a lot of beauty in that, and you got to admire it. So what are the materials required to create a mosaic in the style of ancient Greece? Like, how would they do it, right? So first you need lime, which is our binding agent for our mortar, is what was used by the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. Mortar it's very, very strong. There's lots of these things back in the day that were made in mortar in antiquity, and they're still standing today, which is incredibly impressive. Whereas today we use grout, these things, not quite as strong, and they tend to deteriorate a little bit quicker, which is kind of a shame, but it's a lot more cost effective. So since we are in modern day, I can't find any volcanic ash anywhere. It's very difficult to find. So I'm going to be substituting that with grout, help everything harden a little bit better. And just because I just can't get my hands on volcanic ash, it's impossible in Victoria. Not impossible, but pretty close. And so I'm using grout and not volcanic ash. So it's not entirely accurate to how the ancient Greeks would have created a mosaic, but it's as best as I can get with what I have. So that's why I did that substitution. And they also use seawater to mix this together to activate the lime and the volcanic ash, or your grout, which I think is really fascinating. I'm going to touch on it later about kind of the science behind it. I think it's super cool. So stay ready for that. And then we got the black and white pebbles. So I'm going to be doing a pebble mosaic because it's a lot simpler, and I do not have the time to create tesserae, although I would love to, midterms and all that. So I'm going to be doing a pebble mosaic, black and white, because the shades, I won't be using any shadows, but one of the impressive pieces of pebble mosaics is, since you have these black and white pebbles and there's so many shades, you can create a lot of depth, and you can create a lot of shadows. So, I mean, in this mosaic here, in the Achilles mosaic, it's not a pebble mosaic, but it's a similar technique where you have similar colored rocks, in this case tesserae, right? You have them all close together and you're creating these shadows. So for example, in the bottom right, you see a shadow just under the foot of the man on the right. You can see that. You can see also they did the contrary, where on the gold robe there, you can see it's quite shiny, and they do that by using darker yellows and then slightly lighter yellows, and eventually you get to white, right? And that depth is produced by the contrast of these tesserae, and it's quite amazing, right? So I won't be doing that. I'll be using black and white pebbles. There won't be any shadows, unfortunately. It is very difficult to find pebbles that are just the right size and are the right color. It's not quite. It's very difficult. Like these mosaics that you see in ancient Greece, they're truly amazing. Just the amount of work that's gone into them is pretty astonishing. And we're also going to need a trowel to mix our mortar, and we're going to need a leveling stone, which in today's we would probably just use a trowel or maybe something along those lines, or a big giant concrete slab, which is similar to what the Greeks would use. They would use a large stone that is as flat as it can be. It's quite heavy most times, just to be pressed down on top of the stones so that they're all flat and there's no hills and valleys and those things you don't want in mosaic. You want it to be nice and flat, especially if it's a floor mosaic, which a lot of the time these ancient Greek mosaics they were done on the floor, right? So you don't want to be walking and then you don't want to break your ankle because you slipped into a pothole, really. So this leveling stone is very important as well to these mosaics to make sure everything's flat. And in my case, I'm going to have a cardboard box as my mold to pour my mortar in so I can place my stones on top, because my piece is not a wall piece or a floor piece. It's just going to be a small piece. So yeah. And the process is similar to, I'm trying to recreate it as vividly as I possibly can. So here we're going to be mixing our seawater, lime, and in my case, grout. So it's almost 100%, not quite exactly how the ancient Greeks would do it, but we're pretty close there. I think the grout will help, not seal, but keep everything together a little bit better, So we're going to be doing that, and we're going to pour that into a mold, and then we're going to smooth that with a trowel so that we have a nice flat surface to lay our pebbles on. You're going to need to use less of the leveling stone if you smooth it out beforehand, so that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to arrange my pebbles in my desired pattern, which I'm going to go over later. I'm going to press it in with a leveling stone that I try my best to create, a flat leveling stone, which was not easy. And we're going to let that dry, and then afterwards we're going to clean off the excess mortar. And oftentimes in Greece they would shine the tesserae, but in my case it's just a pebble mosaic, so we're just going to clean off the excess mortar and we won't need to shine anything. And on the left here we have an Alexander the Great at Issus, and it's really interesting because like look at all the detail, the soldiers, and there's so much going on in this piece, yet it's all done by these small little tiles, which is truly amazing. It's very wow, it's so breathtaking. I thought that was super cool. I thought I'd add that. I want to talk about my process. So I needed to go get stones, so I went to the beach and I collected stones. Then I mixed my mortar and I got some grout on the floor, and my grandparents didn't like that, but that's okay. And then I placed my pieces, and now it's drying, so that's very exciting. So what was my idea? What did I want my mosaic to be of? So I needed a simple form mosaic because I don't have all the time in the world, and mosaics are not easy. And what kind of arrangement technique should I use? There's the opus vermiculatum, there's the opus tessellatum. There's all these different types of laying these stones that are, there's lots to choose from. There's a lot of creativity in this, and I found that, well, I'm not creating tesserae, and laying down in a grid pattern would be simplest, but it would take a lot longer. So I'm not going to be using an opus regulatum type of pattern. So I went with a pebble mosaic. I thought that would probably be simplest, also as per your suggestion. Thank you for that. And another thing is I don't have access to volcanic ash, so it's kind of, I need to decide, did I want to use grout? Did I want to use maybe polymeric sand? Something and I decided grout because it would seal everything the best. And another thing in the report I spoke of quite a bit is that ancient Greek mosaics oftentimes depict mythological occurrences. So I was thinking, well, what kind of mythological thing could I depict in my mosaic? And so I like to read, right? And so there's this book named Berserk, and it's a story about this guy who, it's a very typical fantasy story. And he has, on the top picture here, you can see just below his neck on his trap right here, he has this little symbol. So on the bottom right here, it's a little bit closer. And so this is a symbol. Oh, okay. Maybe not quite yet. I'll tell you later. The mythological aspect, right? So Berserk is a fantasy series centered around a typical manly man with a heart-wrenching backstory kind of thing. His mother was killed when he was born. He was brought up by this mercenary tribe who treated him very poorly, and kind of like a character where you really want them to succeed, But throughout the story, he obtains his mark of sacrifice. So, in other words, this group of demons, they mark him and they say, "You're ours." And when this thing called the eclipse happens, you're going to be sacrificed because they put a lot of value in his soul. They're saying like, yeah, your soul belongs to us now. And, they're saying during this time, you're going to be sacrificed. And this is represented and symbolized by the mark of sacrifice. So that's one of the things I was like, oh, maybe I should do something like that. So in ancient Greek mosaics, there's lots of mythological things that are happening, but I chose this Bellerophon on Pegasus in particular because you see here she's slaying a chimera, and during the eclipse, a lot of the time, Guts he has to slay lots of monsters, right? He has to continue slaying monsters because the eclipse is happening. Not only are the demons trying to kill him, they're also trying to kill his friends. They're trying to wreak havoc. They're just really terrorizing and slaughtering, right, all of his friends, and he doesn't like that. So he's going to start fighting these monsters. So here on Pegasus, Bellerophon is about to impale Chimera, right? So I thought that parallel there. So we have a mythological scene from ancient Greek mosaics and something that I want to recreate that is in my kind of mythological scene, right? So it's from fiction and things like that. So in that terms, it could be a type of mythos, right? So first, I gotta collect my pebbles. So there's a beach down by my house. So I went down to the beach and I spent 45 minutes trying to pick out the nicest pebbles I could. So, this really made me realize how difficult it is to make a mosaic. You're really not just picking up a bunch of pebbles on the ground and throwing them on some concrete. It's quite a lot more than that. And it's really impressive that the Greeks did this. I mean, sure, they had slaves and slave labor, but this is a lot of work, and it makes me really appreciate that. And so I had to create my leveling stone. So I noticed up on this hilly part, if I go back, just on the right side here, just around the corner here, there's a little bit more of a hilly part of the beach. And, there's, I'm not sure what kinds of stones, but there's like jagged stones. And I noticed them and I'm like, oh, this is nice and flat. Like this might be optimal for my leveling stone. So I kind of broke a stone off. And you can see here on the right, this is my girlfriend, Darsh, and she is trying her best to flatten this stone so it can be a nice leveling stone, because it's not easy to find a flat stone that's just perfect and heavy. So she's making that there, and we're taking chunks out of this rock here, which were also used in the mosaic. I'll show you later. These flat stones are good because you don't need as much mortar you don't need to push the stone in as far, so you don't need as much mortar to create a flat mosaic. And so we're just hitting this stone and stone and stone, and then finally we get a leveling stone that's mostly flat. It's not 100% flat, so it's not perfect, but it's the best that we could do, and it's most likely what a Greek mason would have used to level their mosaics. I mean, I'm sure if they were paid by someone very rich, they would probably have a marble leveling stone that has been carved and it's very perfect. Ours is not. But moving on. So our seawater, right? So I thought it was really cool that the Greeks used seawater because me being a STEM guy, I just immediately thought, oh, there's a lot of salt content in that water. Like that's going to draw all the moisture out. Like that's so useful. So when you mix your salt and your lime and your grout, you're going to mix it all, and there's not going to be any water just pooling on top because of all the salt, right? So in this diagram here on the right, there's a theory, not a theory, it's been proven. So there's this idea in science called osmosis where on the right you see these parts are the salt molecules and this is the water. So after there's after sitting in there for a little bit, you see the water decreases, right? So the water is going to move over to this salt molecule because the water needs to go from low concentration to high concentration. That's just the basics of osmosis and how it works. So I thought that was cool, right? So if you were mixing up your mortar and your water is sitting on top, well, you most likely don't have water that has enough salt content in it. So seawater is perfect for that because it's going to help mix these things together, keep the water within the mortar and not sitting on top and taking hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to dry. So I thought that was really cool. You know, how the Greeks might have not known that at the time, but they used a technique that we use all the time in modern day society. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And so when I was mixing my mortar, you see on the left here, I poured my lime and my grout in here with my seawater, and I mixed it up with my blue trowel. And you can see on the left, at first the water's pooling on top, but on the right, after I've mixed it, there is no water pooling on top like the way you would mix something else, and maybe the water would be sitting on top like flour and water, right? If you're making bread, there's no salt there. So the water mixes in with the dry ingredients very nicely. And then I smooth it out as best as I can. And then on the right here, you can see I laid out my mosaic beforehand because it's quite challenging to do it on the mortar. As I learned, once you put it in there, you can't get it out, right? So I laid it out beforehand. I got everything prepared. And so first I needed to place my pebbles. So when I was creating my kind of rough draft for my mosaic, I had all my stones in the box that I picked. So I picked a lot of white, black, and kind of grayish stones. And I found one, it's difficult to find stones of all the same size. Two, the shape. Depending on what kind of mosaic you want to go with. Maybe you want to go with a lot of circular ones, or maybe in my case, I wanted to recreate the brand of sacrifice. So I need some jagged edges, right? So if you can see here, just the top of the brand of sacrifice here, you can see these little things poking out. And right here and here, so I tried to find stones that were jagged and pointed to kind of help illustrate that shape of the brand of sacrifice. And it really showed me how difficult it was to find these things. And for a pebble mosaic, if I wanted to create these jagged edges, I would have to hit other rocks, like basically bang rocks together until, like on the bottom here, these two were created while I was making my leveling stone. Bang them together until they create a nice sharp edge. So that was really impressive. Like the Greeks did that for a long, long time. I mean, their artwork is beautiful, right? So it didn't take a week to create like me. You know, it took them months, but it was beautiful. So it's very impressive the way they did that. And also the shade. So you can see on the brand of sacrifice here, I did it in a white shade. I tried my best, but as you can tell, there's like little bits of green, like faint green, light brown, you know, a little bit of gray. It's not easy to find them all the perfect color exactly how you want them. So I laid them out as my rough draft, and then after I got my mortar ready, I placed them on, and I noticed once you put them in, you can't really take them off because the mortar sticks to them and it dries, and then you don't want a rock that has mortar on it. It's not going to look as good. So you have to be very confident when you're placing these stones. You don't want to be a timid mason or an artist, right? You need to be very confident with where you're placing these. And so this is my finished product. So on the left here, we have my mark of sacrifice. You can see I have the symbol in the middle there, and then the black on the bottom and the white on top. I use that the border to illustrate the eclipse. So you need a little bit of background knowledge on the story of Berserk, in the sense that this is the mark of sacrifice, and this is representing the eclipse, my mythological aspect. So I thought that was really cool. Hopefully someone notices that. And then you can see here for comparison, I decided to invert the colors because I had a lot more stones that were rigid, that were lighter colored. So I didn't want to create the brand of sacrifice with these black colors, just because my stones were so circular and smooth, and I wanted something really rigid to help those corners come out a bit better. And so here we come to my problems and solutions. So I face a lot of problems in this, and I try my best to find solutions. And if I were to do this again, I would do some things differently. So for one, it's difficult to find stones equal in size, and with the shades, it's difficult to find them exactly how you want them. I mean, if you're just drawing something, you can just, change the way you hold your pen and move your pen around, and you have exactly what you want. But when you're creating mosaic, it's just not the same. The art is incredibly different in that sense, that you really need to let the earth speak when you have these rocks. You could go around the whole world searching for the most perfect rocks, but you won't find them. um, like these rocks you need them to work together. You need to have a very artistic mind to get these rocks to work together exactly how you want, because you can't have the perfect rock. And these stones, as I was chipping away with them to create my leveling stone, they don't come off exactly how you want them. You might hit a piece and then you might make the stone less flat, and that's not what you want. And you might hit a piece and then you might turn it over and say, oh, this is really dark. I was hoping for a lighter stone. That's a little bit challenging there. You gotta, you have to kind of weigh your options. You're like, oh, do I want to break this stone in half, or do I want to use it? Because, you run a risk when you do that. And then after I place the stones, they're there forever. You can't take them out. So once they're there, they're there. The ratio of seawater to dry ingredients, I struggled with this. I had to make 2 batches. The first batch wasn't quite enough, so I made the second one. And then after I made that, as I was mixing it together, it didn't quite come together exactly how I wanted. So in the future, I would make 1 big batch of mortar, and I would slowly add the seawater, very, very slowly, so you don't end up with too much. Yes, the mortar will dry, but it's best to go slow and have it perfectly exactly how you want. And if I were to do this again, since we live in modern day, and if I wasn't recreating an ancient Greek mosaic exactly the way they did it, I would just purchase stones or tiles that are equal in size and the color that I want, because it'll make it a lot easier when you're trying to get across your artistic point, right? So when I have these stones, it's limiting in the sense that, if I want to have this really harsh line on my brand of sacrifice, I really need to look for those stones, or I just won't have one. I'll have to use these circular pebbles to try and articulate this sharp line that I want. It's difficult to do that. So if I it could have been a possibility that these ancient Greeks would go to the marketplace and purchase some of these tiles, or maybe they would go to other areas of Greece, or maybe they would go to Italy, and all these things maybe they would purchase from elsewhere. But I have yet to find any research of that, any primary sources, so I can't say for sure. But I would find it strange if they didn't sell textiles in that sense. So I would probably purchase stones or tiles that are equal in size, so that makes my life easier. And they would most likely have a slave finding all their stones or their tiles, because you need a lot. You need especially for the mosaics we saw earlier, like the Achilles mosaic. That it wasn't just made in one day of stone searching. I'm sure that took weeks to find all those stones and all those tiles perfectly. So if they had a crew of slaves finding stones, that would certainly speed up the process. And since we live in modern day, if I wanted to find a stone and I found a stone and it wasn't quite the perfect size, instead of banging these rocks together, I'd use a grinder or a jigsaw so that I can get it exactly how I want. So it could lay in perfectly. And so that's what I would do. So I've had these problems. I've given these solutions.